Hi there. Welcome to the first lesson that we're going to do on row restriction. And so that we're all on the same page while we're doing this, we're going to open up a pre-canned query and we're going to work with that. And since I haven't taught you yet how to open up an SQL query, I've only showed you how to save one. We'll show you how to do that now. You want to come over to the icon bar and the second icon. So for those of you that have X-ray vision and maybe your name is Wonder Woman or Superman, you can see that it will say SQL and there's a folder here. Well, you want to click on that. And now you want to navigate to Web Root, Learn, MySQL Foundations, and Examples. And so once you're there, you want to click to highlight m2-1a.sql and click open. And that'll open up the query that we're going to work with. Now, if you've been doing your homework, this should be a little deja vu for you, because this is one of the solutions to one of the exercises that you were assigned to do. So, for those of you that didn't do your exercise, don't be getting the idea that you can always do this, because I'm not always going to be opening up something we previously did and building upon it. Alright, so a couple things to get set up. It's always a good idea to have the schema open that we're working with. So we're working with the BB_batting table in the train warehouse database. So let's just open that. So we can see the schema. Alright. So I want to talk a little about, before we get started with how you do a where statement, the whole concept here, and this is the real inherent power within SQL, is the ability to bring back a record set for the information that we want to see within a table, or when we start to join tables together later in the course, a series of tables that we end up joining together. So we want to bring back a specific record set. Now, and we want to bring it back across the row dimension. And so just so we can visualize, and I can talk about that a little bit, as we run our query now, you've already learned how to bring back a record set where you can restrict the columns that you want to see. And now what we're going to do is we're going to get into, well, let's restrict the rows that we're going to bring back. And in doing that, that's kind of the real essence of SQL. You have data in a database, in a series of tables in a database, and what you're really doing in a select statement, if you think about it, is you're posing a question to the database saying, I want you to give me back these things based on this criteria that I give you. And so up till now, our row restriction has been based off limit 1000, which from a business perspective isn't all that interesting. It's great for doing for analysis, but it just says basically, hey, give me back these columns and just give me back the first 1000. But let's say I want to come in and pose the question with this query and say, I want to see all of the players that have hit more than 49 home runs, so 50 or more home runs. Well, how we would do that is we would create a where clause. And we'd say where HR, and HR is an integer field, so we need to pass it a number, where HR is greater than 49. And this query is going to give us all of the players in the database that have hit more than 49 home runs. Now, the particular table that we're working with, and I've been using the term database, I'm sorry, I mean to be using the term table. So all of the players in the batting table that have hit more than 49 home runs. Apologize for that. So let's run the query and see what we get. So it's returned back for us 36 rows. So a pretty select group, actually. Pretty select group of players. Now, I'm saying it's a pretty select group of players, but how do we know that? Well, we know from the previous query that there's at least 1,000 rows in the database, and I'm getting 36. But how many rows of data are in the batting database? And second, what does each row represent? Well, each row represents basically the statistics for a player for a given year. That's the business logic, if you will, for each row of data. Well, we know there's at least 1,000, but for those of you that aren't baseball fans, big baseball fans out there, how many rows of data are in this database? And how would we find out the answer to that question? And you better know the answer to that question because I taught it to you previously. So what we can do is we could come here and we can do a real quick and dirty. Let's just go and do a real quick and dirty on the batting table, and let's find out how many rows are in this table by adding the count function. And you see we've got 87,308. So 36 is a pretty select group. Pretty select group. Now, suppose we wanted to see how many players hit 10 or more home runs. We can change our selection criteria where HR is greater than 9. And I want to show you this because this is a bit of a quirk with the tool. And we're going to take the limit statement off. We only have 87,000 rows. We're not doing a join where we can create a Cartesian product, which I haven't taught you about yet, so don't worry about that. So it's safe to take the limit statement off our thing now. And I'd expect to see what I'm going to get back here, greater than 9, and I expect to see a whole bunch. And as I look at this, it's only returning the first 1,000 rows because inherently that's what this tool does. It's only going to give back 1,000 rows, and it's going to echo that 1,000 rows have been returned. And that's different from other SQL queries that you would use. They would generally not stop at 1,000. So what we can do is, and also if you notice here, I can cycle through, and this is going to fetch the next 1,000, the next 1,000. You can see there's quite a few, but how many are there? I want an exact count, and this thing's not really giving me an exact count. It's basically stopping at 1,000, even though it's executed the query as I asked for it. It's not really in the message telling me because it's only returning 1,000 at a time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy. So I highlight my where statement. I'm going to do a Control-C here to copy it to the clipboard, and I'm going to go to that original query that I created, the select count, and I'm just going to add my row restriction in there, and that's going to tell me, that's going to give me the answer to the question. So let's see. I would imagine quite a few, 6,000, 7,000, maybe even more than that, probably more than that actually. Yeah, 8,073. So 8,073 players over the course of their careers have hit 10 or more home runs. Now, I can expand my row restriction, and I can say, maybe I also want to see, okay, for those players that have hit more than 10 home runs in a season, maybe I want to see I only want to see the ones that have hit more than 10 home runs, but they've also had at least 100 hits or more in a season. Or actually, let's do it differently. Let's find all the players that have hit more than 10 home runs, but have had less than 100 hits, because that's a pretty good ratio, home runs to hits. It's a more interesting thing to query the database on. So how would I do that? Well, I can use the keyword and I can say where hits, hits, are less than 101. And that will return back the record set for those players. You can see this guy has about a 5-to-1 home runs to hits ratio. And again, if I wanted to see what my record set came back, I could just go to my other query and I could cut and paste this statement in. But I want to ask you a question now. Would you expect the record set to be more or to be less than the original one? In other words, if I take that out and just we're left with HR greater than 9, we know there was 8,073, would I expect the number to be greater or less? And based on your answer, my next question would be why? So let's actually grab this. Again, Control C. And let's find out. Let's go plug this in. And I'm hoping or guessing that you said, well, the number of rows we're going to get back is going to be less. And we run it, and it's significantly less, 1,719. Now, I want to raise an important point here, and that is with row restriction, where you're coupling together using the AND statement. AND is an exclusionary statement. So if you look at it and you don't even really understand the data that's in the database, your expectation should always be as follows. When you add an AND statement, you should never expect to see more rows than you originally had. You would, at the very minimum, expect to see the same amount, not a single one more. If you were to get more rows back on an AND statement, Houston, you got a problem. So you're going to see at least the same number of rows back, but your expectation is typically going to be, well, I'm going to see less, but to what degree? And that's an important point. So again, AND is an exclusionary statement. So let's go back to our main query. And let's say I want to also see, okay, I'd like to see this for all of the players after 1950. So how would we do that? And if you answered, we'd add another and we'd say where year ID is greater than 1949. And we run that, we're going to get our answer back. And again, we can take a look and go, well, what is the exact number? So 1,603. So actually, if we look and our database, and I'll just tell you this, you could go mine and figure it out, our database actually begins, the data set begins in the year 1871 and goes through to the year, I believe it's 2005. So if we actually comment this out, and this is a good thing to show you as well, the comment code for this, for MySQL is this. This creates a comment code. if we run this again, we had 1603. Oh, yes, yes. Never mind. Okay. Syntax error. You have an error in your SQL syntax. And again, that one's not very helpful. By the way, I did this on purpose just to see if you'd catch it, what the error was. What is my error here? Well, I have an and statement and nothing following it. So I guess it's good that I did make that mistake, because you can see that this comment code is actually a multi-line comment code. So I can just comment it out there, and I get 1719. So as I look at this data, I find something interesting out, that most of the players that have hit more than 10 home runs and less, and have had less than 100 hits, have occurred after 1950. A significant number. So there's been maybe 100 from 1871 to 1949. There was about 100 players, if we do the math, somewhere thereabouts, that met this metric, 10 or more home runs, but less than 100 hits. And after 1949, that has that number went up 16-fold. Okay, just take that back off. So kind of handy dandy way there. Now, I also want to talk about this, what I've been showing you here. I've, over the years, had to help people troubleshoot their queries and figure out what's wrong. I've used this technique for getting an account, basically coming back. You know, a lot of times I'll get a query that has very complicated row restriction, and I'll basically take off most of their row restriction, and I'll start to build it up slowly to kind of see if I can figure out where the problem is. And I don't want to get too much into that, because a lot of times it has to do with tables that are incorrectly joined and things like that. But the bottom line is, using the count function against the row restriction can actually also be a useful troubleshooting tool for you. Okay, so I've actually taught you enough now about row restriction that we're done with this specific lesson on row restriction, and you can head off back to the workbook and work on your exercise, and I'll see you after you're done. Later.